Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. And first off, I want to take this time to wish every one of you and your families a very Merry Christmas, as that is upon us this next week. And that you get together with your family. The importance of that will never change. And what we're going to talk about today really drives home that the government, in effect, has no right, especially bureaucrats, have no right to do what they are doing. You got to figure that out for yourself. There's so much information that is truthful information out there that I'm not going to belabor that. But I believe, with my fullness of understanding, that those who want to gather should gather. Those that want to be with family should be with family. And there is no bureaucrat, government administrators that can take and stop you. The whole point of today is something that was reminded to me by a friend this week, as I noted in the program for the program. The 16th of December basically is a remembrance of the Boston Tea Party. And it was known as that at that time in 1773. There were many things that led up to the Boston Tea Party, and there are also some very interesting letters that Sam Adams wrote. And there was a declaration out of Philadelphia and New York in particular that stated the responsibility of the citizenry to stand up against tyranny. Now, I have to admit, as I consider everything that is going on right now, we aren't obviously going to see that. We're going to see the few people, like here in Ohio with Stand Up Ohio or Ohio Stands Up, and with the Free Ohio Now group and several other groups that are out there doing these actions, independent education, various taking in and protesting and all of that. But you see, that's not what happened in 1773. The Tea Party that came into play in 1773 was the action of that doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates. And quite frankly, when we assess all things in the citizenry and within the context of governance in our modern day, we do not have magistrates, those elected officials, and those that would be even involved in a political party that have the willingness to stand up against bureaucratic and administrative tyranny. It's not going to happen. So everybody that is making the efforts, they're grand efforts, and we have to do something. The citizens have to do something. But this is where things in America right now fall apart when it comes to all that is going on around us. And what that is that we do not have elected officials at the township, at the city, at the county, and let alone at the state level that are willing to stand and fight against the tyrannies of bureaucrats, career bureaucrats. Statistically, we know that there are many things that are wrong, that are evil, that are against every aspect of fundamental that is true. One of the key elements that we have that is brought to bear in the program promo, the blog post, if you will. Yeah, right up here over my shoulder. It's samueladamsreturns.net for those that are listening on the podcast or the radio, that it does drive to the difference of what was preached from the pulpits as to the fullness of a Reformation gospel, as to the fullness of what it means to understand liberty. So before we dive into the underlying pieces, the other components of the Tea Party of 1773 and the parallels of those egregious events that were happening, and the greatest egregious event that is happening today that can parallel from a process perspective is that of the whole Chi-Com flu insanity. But you're quizzical. You're probably scratching your head, those that are listening on the podcast or the radio program, and those that are looking at me on YouTube are going, what in the world are you thinking that, yeah, you always hammer on the pulpits not preaching the same. Well, they're not. We've had history lessons as to what happened right away in the the mid 1700s relative to universalism and Unitarianism that started eroding the fundamentals of the gospel. And then you're going, well, okay, big deal. Well, I'm going to tell you, just plain fact. If you think a political movement and a political party is going to save the nation, you are so, I don't know, it's just not going to happen. It has to go back to what ends up in the Reformation of the churches. And one aspect of all of that I want to bring to your attention, as I said, I noted it in the promo again, and that the whole idea of what's going on with not just economics and all of that, but more so the catastrophe of what's happened in churches. So there's two things that I have in the promo, and I don't know, I think there might be a third, but two in particular that you need to take into consideration is one from a friend of mine, Gary Randall. He's a pastor. He writes in Faith and Freedom is his blog. He's on different radio programs up there in the Washington State, Seattle, Portland markets. He's on those programs. You can check him out there by going to nothing other than faithandfreedom.us or blog.faithandfreedom, one word, faithandfreedom.us. This post that he put up this past week, United Methodist Church has lost the vision. And we know that. We know what was happening in the United Methodist Church in respect to its split and a number of the changes that went on, and that, in fact, a good portion of the church has actually started a whole nother denomination because they do not see any means and mechanisms of reforming the church as it came out of the conferences this past year. So what's there in the promo and at the website, samueladamsreturns.net, under the title of that, the church, Methodist Church losing its vision, is a picture for their Christmas nativity scene. And what's there is all of this signage with Black Lives Matter, all the justice stuff, all the social justice nonsense, everything like that. There's Joseph kneeling at the manger, but there's Mary standing with her arms up, joining those protests. And the whole message that's there at this Claremont Church's outreach this year with their nativity scene is that the Holy Family, in front of a painting of masked people holding signs and reading Black Lives Matter and I Can't Breathe and all of that, and their whole aspect of the mural is the idea on what they came up with, this statement, a theological statement. And what they're saying is, we affirm and join the call for justice and equity by the Black Lives Matter movement to ensure that Black lives matter as much as any other life. And their theological statement then reads in part as, our faith in Christ challenges us to stand with Mary in her call for justice for the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. Now, you can see also there. I've got the link to a sermon by Pastor Doug Wilson that actually disproves that theology. But then you have to understand that there is another from the Progressive American, the Center for American Progress, which is progressive socialist communist organization, that has a article here from September 21st that says how the Trump administration has harmed faith communities. And then they go on to talk about how the policies of the Trump administration are only for a privileged faith community, and that only being white Christians, conservative white Christians, conservative white Christian traditionalists. Instead, this progressive group and movement is about the religion of the LGBTQ rights, of the social justice warrior rights, of all of these other, what they say are the greater, larger Protestant black churches in America, and that abortion should be legal and fine and fair for everyone. So why will America, and why cannot America have a Tea Party of 1773? Because there is no unity in understanding what it means to have a biblical Reformed church when they claim only 15% of the whites, the evangelicals in America, identify as religious traditionalists. And they're claiming that this is all, while 3 in 4 Americans identify with religious tradition, only 15% identify as white evangelicals, according to a 2019 American Values Atlas survey. So what they're saying is that the Trump policies of stopping on abortion, to take and bring other traditional values back to America, to stop what we call the evils and the insanities of the progressives, even in religion. You can't have the political people who play to the tunes of the ubiquitous crowd, the larger numbers, to satisfy the power plays and games. We're afraid to go down and stop on those subjects. They're afraid to take and legislate morality, when in fact they already are, by not taking and bringing laws into effect, as Donald Trump has done, for the good reason, the good thinking, the rationale, the fundamental foundational truths and morality of this nation. You have all these others that turn out to be those that love the Obama third term. I mean, the Biden administration in voting for them, and you don't have the magistrates. We're going to pick up on this in the next segment because it's so critical to understand, especially for people on this program. The Anti-Federalists got it right, and Sam Adams talks about morality and truth when it comes to defining a Tea Party. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. It proves itself out every single day. And you know what? Welcome here at Liberty Works Radio Network, as I always do in this segment, is to take and say, quit listening inside of the echo chamber. And I know that a lot of you are out there that listen to other things, but you know what? Try and get the foundational principles and truths. And Liberty Works Radio Network has a blend. I'm going to be quite honest with you. Here on this network, you're going to hear echo chamber stuff. You're going to hear people every day that have the solid understanding of the truths and the ways to work through all those principled fundamentals of both constitutionalism as well as Reformed biblical truth. And then you're going to have the other spectrum that at some point in a program late at night or something like that, in a replay on Saturday, you may even find a tinfoil hat or two. And that's what makes this network so interesting with that type of diversity in programming. And so I ask you with that to take and find that donate button and hit that donate button and contribute so this network can stay on the air. Now, what we were doing in the last segment is that I finished off with the two different articles, one from my friend, none other than the notable Gary Randall. They're in that Seattle, West Coast, Washington, Oregon ministry opportunity. Thankful that he's in there fighting and talking about what was going on in the Methodist Church and really how they lost their way and what they've been doing and these nativity scene that they have there in California with this church, and it's supporting and showing that God supports Black Lives Matter. He supports socialism. He supports all these things, and Mary calling us in to stand up with all of that. And that's not what it is. What it is, and the reality is, they don't understand that the babe in the manger is the sovereign of the universe. They're not there to take and bring that worship to him. And if you go and you listen to that sermon by Pastor Wilson, one of the things that you'll learn is what is significant about Bethlehem that you may never have heard before. Who were those shepherds, and what was the significant relationship of Bethlehem in distance and purpose to Jerusalem? I think that puts a perspective on the truth as to Jesus being born in Bethlehem that will take and bring a light to you that you have never seen before. But then we look at the more egregious article, and again, as you look at that one, is how the Trump administration has harmed the faith communities. And once again, this is by the the Center for American Progress, which they are a socialist, communist, globalist think tank that, take it for what it is. So as we look at this, and we have to understand that we do not have the biblical truth reference that the early citizens did, the patriots did in 1773, or even prior to that, all the way through into what was going on from the time that the Pilgrims landed and what was happening with the Puritans. As you can see in the Federalist Papers from last week, the article I put there, and I'll put a reference, I think I put the reference there again for you to look at that, because I think it's very well done on the foundation of this nation. Without that truth from the Puritans, and that's why you have so many people referencing back to, what is it, that 1619 project or whatever that insanity is in relationship to down in Virginia, because that was not the true representation that developed this nation. The landing in Virginia, and that was not what made America. It's what happened in the Massachusetts colonies that developed America. So as we look at that, we start to wonder, well, what about the Tea Party? Oh yeah, it was coming in with this tax on the tea, and they didn't really want that, and they didn't want to pay the tax. No, it wasn't about paying the tax or anything. The tax was minuscule. The tax was virtually nothing. It was the idea, no different than what we're saying today, is from the whole idea of the business community manipulating the administrative state, that then they were able to persuade a governing body to force action and force soul sourcing in such a way that it was impacting the free decision making of those in the colonies. So when we look at, for instance, I have to go through just momentarily some of the points in Sam Adams as he wrote vis-a-vis the committee of a resolution of the town of Boston on November 5th, 1773. And he was addressing here in this report, and all of this was in the draft of the preamble, in particular is in the personal handwriting of Sam Adams. And that the whole point of this was an act of the British Parliament that was passed in that previous session, that the East India Company are, by the said act, allowed to export their tea into America in such quantities as the Lord of the Treasury shall judge proper. And some people, with an evil intent to amuse the people, and others, through inattention to the true design of the act, have so construed that the same as that the tribute of 3 pence on every pound of tea is not to be enacted by the detestable taskmasters there. Upon due consideration, therefore, resolved that the sense of the town cannot be better expressed on the occasion than in the words of certain judicious resolves lately entered to by our worthy brethren, the citizens of Philadelphia. So the gist of it is that they saw already the underlying aspects. They saw the underlying tyrannies, the evil intent that was in this act. So again, the tax itself wasn't that much. It was what was buried in there. So here's what Philadelphia resolved. And we're going to cover that, and then we'll get into a little bit more of what happened in the third segment. But Philadelphia resolved, and this was adopted then by the town of Boston, that the disposal of their own property is the inherent right of freemen, that there can be no property in that which another can of right take from us without our consent, that the claim of Parliament to tax America is, in other words, a claim of right to buy contributions on us at pleasure. So the first part that is very, very important is that they can't mess with your property. So your businesses, your ability to trade, your ability to exchange money for other goods, your ability to utilize your personal resources is your property, and nobody has a right to that property or can take that right from you without your consent. Sadly, in America, in this year 2020, people, without even thinking, gave up their right to their property, gave up their right to their businesses. How are you going to reclaim it when so many just gave it up? I'm down to the last 5 minutes. These you can find in the promo in a link. That the duty imposed by Parliament upon tea landed is a tax on the Americans or levying contributions on them without their consent. That the express purpose for which the tax is levied on the Americans, namely for the support of the government, the administration of justice, and the defense of His Majesty's dominion in America, has a direct tendency to render assemblies useless and to introduce arbitrary government and slavery. That's what the bureaucrats are doing right now in 2020 and into 2021 is arbitrary government. Your assemblies don't mean anything, as we saw even in the election when you have justices and governors making decisions that are solely in the hands of legislatures. So true. Right now, it's all arbitrary government and slavery. That a virtuous and steady opposition to the ministerial plan of governing America is absolutely necessary to preserve even the shadow of liberty, and is a duty of every freeman in America owes to his country and to himself and to his posterity. You got to stand up. That the resolution lately come by the East India Company to send out their teas to American subjects to the payment of duties on its being landed here is an open attempt to enforce ministerial plan and a violent attack upon the liberties of America. So when you have all this COVID stuff, when you have all these businesses, when you have all of the techno-oligarchs out of the valley, when you have the Bill Gateses pushing on all of their stuff and these businesses making millions of dollars off of you, that's a ministerial plan. And that is a violent attack upon the liberties of America. But you don't know that. And you don't have any political people that have gumption, that have gonads, that have moral integrity to fight for the liberties of America. That it is the duty of every American to oppose this attempt. Instead, we have cowards that mask up, that hide behind all of the insanities and the force that is upon them. That whoever shall directly or indirectly countenance this attempt or in any way aid or abet in unloading, receiving, or vending the tea sent or to be sent out of the East India Company while it remains subject to a payment of duty here in America is really a traitor. That the committee be immediately chosen to wait for those gentlemen who it is reported are appointed by the East India Company to receive and sell the tea, to request them from a regard to their own characters and the peace and good order of this town and providence to immediately resign their appointment. In other words, in this, the governor should resign in Ohio. These other governors should resign because they are doing things with the Chi-Com flu and perpetuating the ministerial, the insanity of the bureaucracies that are invalid, that are not truthful, that are deceptive and destructive to the liberties of America and have enslaved the whole population. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you do? Well, we could have our citizens groups, and we have to do that with the citizens groups and the great voices that are out there across the nation that are standing up. But at this point, we have no magistrates. We have no lesser magistrates that have the intestinal fortitude inside the legislatures to act according to their moral duties to stand up for our liberty, to push back on the bureaucrats and tell them no, to take and write the resolutions. There's some of that going on. But what are they doing? What are they truly, really doing and bringing the people together, as we're going to talk about? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did. They got it right. This is Tom Navolis, your host. Welcome back, all you screaming eagles down there in Lima, Ohio. I'm so thankful that you're back with me, and I want to just again wish everybody a Merry Christmas, and just to thank you for being a part of this program, taking the time to listen to it, and hopefully we can bring some resolution, because as we talked in the last segment, we finished up very abruptly, if I may say, is that where are your elected officials? But first off, we have to revisit what happened from what Sam Adams reproduced out of Philadelphia, and basically mandating that we be citizens of action. Not citizens to kowtow, but citizens of action. Not citizens to have our liberties taken away, but citizens of action. We have a right to act if you want liberty, but you have to press on your elected officials. That means you're in your townships, in your school boards, in your counties, in your cities, in every aspect of those that are in elected offices. It's time. And most importantly, as I talked about in the first and the second segment, is that once again, you need to be having serious conversations in your pulpits to hear the messages as they were preached during the foundation of this nation. Biblical truth as it was preached at the foundation of this nation. The enemy, the progressives, the socialists, the Marxists, the communists have their religions. Their religions are, you don't understand the homosexual religions. You don't understand the earth religion. You don't understand the jihadist religion. You do not understand the humanist religions. You do not understand that you are the minority and you have no right to take and express your religious view. You have no right to push your morality on them as they force their immorality on you. Oh my. Yes, it is, once again, even no different from the founding of this nation, from the very foundation of Christianity. It is. It's not just a cultural war. It is truly a religious war, as it has been since Adam took and capitulated to the devil. But we know we win. We are the victors because we have a sovereign that leads, a sovereign that has, through all of history, when those who are willing to acknowledge his sovereignty and to stand in those truths and principles from that whole perspective of his church, his body, it's all through the factual history, and embedded here in American history is that you have to fight for your liberty. Yeah, you have to fight. You have to be willing to get scratched. You have to be willing to be bloodied. You have to be willing to get up out of your seats, stand, come together, first and foremost in understanding the sovereign, the truth of that, and liberty in Christ. And then you have to be willing to say, you know what? I don't have to roll over. I don't have to be persecuted. Under our constitutional Republican form of government, I have every right to stand against the evil. And that's what was going on. As I mentioned to you in the last segment, that Sam Adams was writing and what was going on in Philadelphia clearly understood was that this whole issue of the tea was not anything necessarily about the taxation. Sam Adams wrote this. I'm going to give you this whole thing. And he wrote a letter at one point back here, oh gosh, in 1773 to William Cooper. And he was talking about what was going on with the tax and how they think that they had the right to tax, and that it's worse than that. Its more grievous nature will be laid on every article exported from Great Britain, which our necessity may require, and our shameful luxury may betray us into the use of. And when once they have found a way to rob us, their avarice will never be satisfied until they are our own our manufactures and even our land, purchased and cultivated by our hard laboring ancestors, are taxed to support the vices and the extravagance of wretches whose vileness ought to banish them from the society of men. He's talking about what we've already seen, is that many businesses under this Chi-Com flu debacle have been shut down and destroyed. Their private property, the labor of their hands, has been taken and consumed by the likes of Amazon, consumed by the likes of the big box stores, consumed by those who have that special privilege. And to a point that was made by a friend of mine who worked for a big box store, now the big box stores are saying, yeah, if somebody walks out with, products, don't even bother going after them. We'll just write that off. So they don't care about losses by theft, especially in those areas where Black Lives Matter went into the Walmarts and the Kmart and this mart and that mart and plundered them. But even worse, as he's talking about, their avarice will never be satisfied until our own manufacturers and our own land is taken, robbed from us. They're doing that. Many people have lost their homes under this Chi-Com flu. Many people have lost other things. And why? Because of their extravagance and their vices, their immorality. We think, therefore, gentlemen, that we are in duty bound to use our most strenuous endeavors to ward off the impending evil, and we are sure that upon a fair and cool inquiry into the nature and tendency of this ministerial plan, this bureaucratic plan, you will think this tea now coming to us more to be dreaded than a plague or pestilence, for these can only destroy our mortal bodies. But we never knew a country enslaved without the destruction of their virtue, the loss of which every good man must esteem infinitely greater than the loss of his life. We've lost that virtue. I mean, you've heard some of the big names like, the Rush Limbaughs and, some other, I would say, calm-headed pundits talk about the lost virtue. I think Bill Bennett actually wrote a book on the lost virtues here in America, or regaining the virtue of America. And that's what it comes down to, is our morality and our virtue is being lost, being taken away, and we are being demoralized by this ministerial, quote unquote, those can't see me on the radio, the podcast, I'm making the air quotes, the bureaucrats. That is the ministerial evil that Sam Adams was talking about. Well, here it is. That was their whole idea, is to come after us. Where are we? What are we going to do? And we earnestly request, after having carefully considered this important matter, you would impress upon the minds of your friends, neighbors, and fellow townsmen the necessity of exerting themselves in a most zealous and determined manner to save the present and future generations from temporal, and we think we may with seriousness say, eternal destruction. He postscripting, he says that to drain their cash for the support of their enemies on this and the other side of the water in luxury and debauchery. That's what the technocrats want. That's what all of these people want is, how do you make a country socialist? You destroy their virtues, you destroy their morality, and you drain all of their cash for what? For the lust and luxury of the power elite and their own personal debauchery. So when we talk about these other religious thought patterns, or so-called religious thought patterns, they're debauched, they're debased. So he goes on to conclude, we are reduced to this dilemma, either to sit down quiet under this and every other burden that our enemies shall see fit to lay upon us as good-natured slaves, or rise and resist this and every other plan laid for our destruction as becomes wise freemen. Are you a freeman? Are you a free citizen? Act like one. In this extremity, we earnestly request your advice, and this is to these other towns and cities, and that you would give us the earliest intelligence of the sense of your several towns have in this present gloomy situation of our affairs. Well, let me tell you, they called for a meeting, and that would be on the 29th of November. And marching from all of these other towns and cities in that greater Massachusetts area, 5,000 people showed up. Now, take that, and when, we'll do maybe someday a calculation of the population and what that meant. 5,000 people showing up to be at the meeting about this whole issue would actually be similar to about 50 million people showing up at the polls. Okay? I don't know, maybe a little bit high. But the point of the matter is, these people went to a town meeting. They showed up in protest and to support and to say, no, we're freemen. We're going to do something. We've been lied to by the ministerial intent and scheming. The bureaucrats, the administrators, the governors, the governor of Massachusetts, the parliament, and yes, the businesses that were in collusion with those people. The technocrats, the techno-oligarchs out of Silicon Valley, all of the larger businesses, even the Koch brothers and all the others like that, more than just the Soroses. How about the establishment Republicans who are telling you, no, Donald Trump, give it up. Joe Biden's won. Give it up. No. Are we going to lay down to be slaves? No, we're not supposed to. And this is gospel truth. You're not supposed to be slaves. But let's hear it there in the pulpits. Let's learn this understanding. Let's learn these truths. Go to the references. Look these things up. Pay attention, not to tinfoil hats, but get substance. And put the pressure. This is your action. Put the pressure on your elected officials. If you have to get 50 people standing in front of their homes, okay? Just like my friends in Idaho did up in Boise. They went to the homes of the elected there in that county and let them know, you can't be pulling this stuff. We're not going to put up with it anymore. And we have to stand up for liberty and true justice for our posterity Otherwise, you're slaves. Come on back next week when Sam Adams returns and those anti-federalists got it right.